The laughter from the living room faded into the background as I stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dishes. The scent of grilled meat and warm spices still clung to the air, mixing with the faint sound of glass clinking and the low murmur of conversation. My hands moved automatically, scrubbing away the remnants of dinner, but my mind was somewhere else. I had noticed it before, the way his eyes lingered on me a second too long, the way his voice softened whenever he spoke to me. A fleeting brush of fingers as he passed by, a glance held just a little longer than necessary. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. He was my husband's friend, a regular guest in our home, someone I was supposed to feel at ease around, but something had shifted, something unspoken humming beneath the surface. The sound of footsteps behind me made my breath hitch. I knew before turning who it was. He wasn't in search of a drink or a plate, nor was he on his way to the living room. He had come for something else. "You always do everything yourself," his voice was smooth, unhurried, "even after hosting an entire dinner." I forced a small smile, my fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't mind. It helps me unwind." His presence didn't move away. I could feel the heat of his body close behind me, the air suddenly thick between us. My heartbeat quickened. His words seemed harmless, but there was something in his tone, something weighted. "You take care of everything," he continued, his voice quieter now. "Your husband is lucky." The way he said it made my stomach twist, a warmth crawling up my spine. I should have laughed it off, told him to leave, called for my husband in the next room. But I did none of those things. I simply stood there, my grip tightening on the damp dish towel. And then his hand. A single touch, light, almost hesitant, but deliberate. His palm rested on the small of my back, the warmth seeping through the thin fabric of my dress. It was a touch that crossed a line, one that shouldn't have happened. I inhaled sharply, but I didn't move away. My body stayed frozen in place, caught between what I should do and what I was feeling. His fingers barely moved, but the sensation sent a pulse through me, awakening something that had been buried beneath routine and years of predictability. "You shouldn't do that," I finally whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. His fingers traced a slow path up my spine before he pulled away. The loss of contact should have been a relief, but instead it left a lingering ache, a question that neither of us dared to voice. A low chuckle escaped him. "I know." Then, just like that, he stepped back. The moment had passed, but the weight of it hadn't. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the faucet, drying them on a towel with deliberate slowness. I told myself it was nothing, that it was harmless, but deep down I knew better. Something had started. Something irreversible. The warmth of his palm still lingered on my lower back, even after he had pulled away. My breath was uneven, my hands gripping the counter as if I needed something solid to hold on to. I should have said something, anything, to stop this before it went further. A casual laugh, a dismissive shake of my head, even a sharp word to remind him of where he stood in my life. But I did nothing. A slow, deliberate touch traced up my spine, feather-light, yet enough to send a shiver through me. My skin prickled under his fingertips, every nerve on high alert. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't innocent. It was a test, and I knew it. He was waiting for a reaction, for permission, something I wasn't sure I wanted to give. I turned to face him, finally forcing myself to move. My heart pounded as our eyes met, his gaze steady, unreadable, but filled with something undeniable. There was no hesitation in the way he looked at me, as if he had already decided where this was heading, as if he had been waiting for this moment far longer than I had realized. "You always work so hard," he murmured, his voice low and smooth. "Your husband is lucky." His words hung between us, their meaning deeper than they should have been. My throat felt dry. I could have brushed it off as nothing, pretended it was just a harmless compliment. But we both knew better. He wasn't just talking about my efforts in the kitchen. He was talking about me, who I was, what I gave, what I had to offer. My breath caught. It was wrong, all of it. The way he looked at me, the way he stood so close that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the way my body reacted before my mind could process it. I felt something stirring inside me, a mixture of emotions that I couldn't untangle. Nervousness, excitement, guilt. I should have stepped back. I should have broken the moment before it could go any further. But instead, I stood there, caught between everything I had always known and something I had never dared to acknowledge. His fingers grazed my wrist this time, a whisper of a touch that sent heat rushing through my veins. My lips parted slightly, though I had no words to offer. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to tell myself to stop. But I didn't. Instead, I let the moment stretch between us, the air thick with something neither of us wanted to name. A small, buried part of me leaned into the attention, craving it in a way that I couldn't explain. And in that silent, stolen moment, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want him to stop. The clinking of glasses and muffled laughter from the living room reminded me that my husband was only a few feet away. His presence should have been enough to ground me, to pull me back to reality, but instead, it only heightened the weight of the moment. My heart pounded as I took a step back, reaching for the dish rag with shaking fingers, pretending that I was too busy to notice the way he still stood close behind me. I forced my breathing to steady, my mind scrambling for the right words to end this before it spiraled out of control. I knew this was dangerous, knew that a single misstep could send me tumbling into something I couldn't undo. But he didn't move, he didn't step away. Instead, he leaned in, his voice a low whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "No one will ever know." His breath warmed the side of my neck, and I gripped the counter even harder, willing myself to push him away. My head screamed at me to do the right thing, to put an end to this before it went further. I opened my mouth to tell him to stop, to remind him of the man sitting just beyond this room, but no words came out. My chest tightened as my heart waged a war against itself. Was this really what I wanted? Or was it just the intoxicating pull of something forbidden, something reckless, something new? I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to shake the storm of emotions crashing through me. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation anymore. It was a choice, a defining moment, a crossroads that would change everything. The weight of it pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't step away. His fingers brushed against my arm, the lightest touch, but it burned through me like fire. My pulse quickened, my resolve weakening with every passing second. The pull was undeniable, magnetic. I wanted to fight it, to silence the part of me that was craving this attention, this stolen moment. But I didn't. I didn't push him away. I didn't walk out. And that hesitation, that single pause was all he needed. A slow smirk played at the corner of his lips as he tilted his head slightly, reading the silence between us. He knew. He could feel it. The way my body reacted before my mind could catch up. The way I hadn't stopped him when I should have. I swallowed hard, a knot forming in my throat. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was real. It was happening, and I had let it. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the soft glow of the lamp in the living room. My husband's voice drifted in from the other room, mingling with the low murmur of the television. My breath was unsteady, my pulse quickening as I stepped forward, determined to create distance between myself and the tension that had been building all evening. But then he was there. His presence filled the narrow space, blocking my path, his body just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My heart pounded, a silent warning that I needed to move, to step around him and pretend that none of this was happening. But my feet remained planted. His voice was lower now, rougher. "I see the way you look at me." A sharp breath caught in my throat. I wanted to deny it, to push back, to tell him he was imagining things. But the way his eyes held mine made it impossible to lie, to him or to myself. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, desperate to hold on to the last shred of control I had left. "This is wrong," I whispered, forcing the words out before they could get lost in the weight of the moment. And I meant it. At least part of me did. His lips tilted into a slow smirk, as if he could see right through me, as if he knew that my resistance was nothing more than a fragile thread waiting to snap. He took a step closer, his chest nearly brushing against mine. I should have moved. I should have stopped this before it could go any further, but I didn't. I couldn't. A warm breath ghosted over my skin as he leaned in, his lips barely brushing the curve of my neck. The touch was fleeting, just a whisper of sensation, but it sent a shiver racing down my spine. My fingers tightened at my sides, my body betraying the battle raging in my mind. "I know you feel it too," he murmured, his voice laced with quiet confidence. "Don't fight it." Everything in me screamed that I should pull away, that I should turn around and walk back into the safety of the living room, to my husband, to the life I had built. But his hands skimmed down my arms, slow and deliberate, and my resolve cracked. My eyes fluttered shut for just a moment, just long enough to let myself forget the consequences. The warmth of his touch, the weight of his breath, the pull of something forbidden. It drowned out everything else. This was my last chance to stop it, my final moment to walk away. But I didn't. The warmth of his breath lingered against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. My body tensed, caught between two worlds, one where I turned away, stepped back, and walked into the safety of what I had always known, and another where I let go, let the moment consume me, let him pull me into something I knew I could never take back. His fingers brushed along my arm, slow and deliberate, his touch igniting something deep within me, something I had buried beneath years of predictability, of routine, of knowing exactly how each day would begin and end. My breath was shaky, uneven, my pulse thrumming against my skin as he leaned in closer. "This is real," he murmured, his lips just inches from mine. "Don't pretend you don't want it." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. I should have stopped him, should have stepped away before this went any further. My husband was just a few feet away, unaware, trusting. The weight of my vows pressed down on me, but they felt distant now, like words from another life. His hands found my waist, steady, firm, pulling me against him. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, grasping for something solid, something real in the midst of this chaos. My heart pounded, my breath hitching as his lips brushed against mine, hesitant at first, waiting for the final decision to come from me. I could still stop this, I could still pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I melted into the kiss, letting the warmth of his mouth claim mine, letting the fire that had been simmering between us finally ignite. Every rational thought disappeared, drowned beneath the weight of temptation. The room, the house, the entire world outside of this moment ceased to exist. There was no past, no future, only now. His grip tightened as his hands explored the curves of my body, as my own fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing more. The tension between us, the weeks, maybe months, of stolen glances, of lingering touches, of words left unsaid, all unravelled in an instant. I had agreed, I had let it happen. A distant voice in my mind screamed at me, reminding me of the consequences of what this meant, of what I had just done. But the moment had swallowed me whole, and there was no turning back now. Something in me had shifted forever. The warmth of my husband's hand on my knee sent a chill through my body. I forced a smile as he spoke, nodding at the right moments, pretending to listen. The sound of his voice, once so familiar and comforting, now felt distant, like a language I no longer understood. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking, but it did nothing to stop the knot in my stomach from tightening. Across the room I felt his eyes on me, a silent pull, an unspoken reminder of what had just happened. My chest tightened as I dared to glance up. There it was, the smirk, small enough to go unnoticed by everyone but me. My breath hitched, and I looked away too quickly, my heart slamming against my ribs. I could still feel his touch, his hands lingering on my skin, the ghost of his breath on my lips. The room felt too small, too warm, the air thick with something I couldn't escape. My husband laughed beside me, unaware, trusting. The sound sent a wave of nausea through me. I reached for my drink, my fingers wrapping too tightly around the glass. The ice clinked as I lifted it to my lips, hoping the cold would wash away the heat still simmering beneath my skin. It didn't. Nothing would. His voice cut through the conversation, deep and steady, as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't just unravelled me in the dark, as if I hadn't let him. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my expression calm, to act as though everything was the same. But it wasn't. It never would be again. My husband turned to me, his face soft, full of affection. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." A lie. One of many. His fingers traced gentle circles on my knee, a gesture so familiar it should have soothed me. Instead, it burned. The guilt clawed at my chest, suffocating, relentless. I needed space, air, distance from this room, from the weight of my choices, from the man who had just stolen a piece of me. But when I stood, when I muttered something about needing a moment, I felt him watching me again. It wasn't over, and I couldn't pretend that it was. The weight of it hadn't left me. It clung to my skin, settled deep in my bones, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed. Every time my husband touched me, even the simplest graze of his fingers against my arm, my body tensed. He didn't notice, at least I hoped he didn't. I forced smiles, played the part of a loving wife, but inside I was unravelling. The nights were the worst. Lying beside him in bed, his steady breathing filling the silence, my mind replayed everything on a loop. The way his friend had looked at me, the way I had let him, the heat of his hands, the quiet thrill of knowing what we were doing was wrong, the rush of it, the way it made me feel something I hadn't in years. And then the shame that came crashing down afterward. I told myself it was over, a mistake, a moment of weakness. I could move past it, bury it deep where no one would ever find it. But then my phone buzzed. My breath caught in my throat. It was late, too late for anything innocent. My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart hammering as I read the message. "I need to see you again." A cold knot twisted in my stomach. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it and never looked back. But my hands betrayed me, gripping the phone tighter, rereading the words, searching for something in them I couldn't even name. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened screen, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Who was she? A mistake could be forgotten, but a choice, a decision, that had consequences, and I had already made mine.